in 2010 and spoke with us at this location at our previous forum. So, Julianne, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. And thank you, Gary, for that great talk. And a few of the ideas that Gary talked about, there's a few of these same ideas will come up in this talk. So I'm going to be talking today about the idea of the daimon, which it comes from ancient times. It comes from all different traditions. So in ancient times, I guess I should use the microphone so I don't have to yell. In ancient times and during the Renaissance, each person was said to be born with something called a daimon. And the word daimon has been defined and discussed in various ways. And here are some words we might use. And as we go along, you might think about which words resonate with you. Because each word is imperfect in and of itself. It's really an experience. So, but these are some words that have been used for the daimon. Genius, in the sense of your talent. Angel, a guardian angel, a guiding angel. A soul, a paradigm or a pattern. An image, your fate, an inner twin. An acorn is the term James Hillman uses, which means something that is full of potential. A life companion, a guardian, or your heart's calling. And some also call it your higher self. So it's a complex subject, and this is going to be an exploration. So we're going to ask questions. I'm going to ask questions and see what different people have said. We'll have a discussion at the end, but if you have a comment or a question or a thought, feel free to raise your hand and we'll talk about it. So the idea of the daimon is something that, as I said, has been spoken of and experienced in different ways by different people throughout history. But for now, let's just say that each person is born with a guiding spirit, and this spirit or angel urges us onward through thoughts, feelings, signs, and symbols. So I'm going to talk about some of the writings on the daimon by Greek philosophers such as Plato and Plotinus, and also by some Renaissance philosophers, and then move on to a couple of modern thinkers. And then if we have time, maybe we can discuss some of the threads in our own lives and see what kind of synchronicities or hunches or urges have moved us to do different things in our lives. So, and you have two handouts. One is a quote by Marsilio Ficino. It's a long quote, which you can just keep, and I'll mention later. And the other is some questions that if you feel like thinking about them and jotting down your thoughts either now or later, that's for you to keep.
Mic a little bit closer to your mouth.
Okay. So a bit more on what is a daimon. Daimons can be nature spirits or spirit guides, forces of nature, or the gods themselves. There are some references to a daimon being also a kind of legacy of a great hero. So someone who was a great person in life and then died and became a daimon. Plato said that good men are diamond-like when they are alive, and become diamonds after they die. To Plotinus, eudaimonia meant the well-being of your soul or the highest good. So when you listen to your daimon, you're going to flourish in life. This is where you're going to receive your fulfillment. But while a daimon is more or less the way we're talking about it in this sense is a good force, it can be dangerous because it can push us beyond our limits because it's very strong and wants us to move forward in the way the daimon wants us to. Myths about daimons can be found in many cultures and traditions. The Hindus and Buddhists also have them in different ways, but this is tied more to reincarnation and karma. But you still come into the world with a particular destiny or calling. Plato also spoke about reincarnation in the myth of from the Republic, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And so for him also there's a connection between the idea of the daimon, reincarnation or rebirth, and the purpose or purposes of an individual. So here I can ask, is it that the daimon accompanies us just on this one lifetime, or does it have to do with reincarnation? And does the diamond stay with us through various incarnations? The poet Yeats thought that that was the case. He and his wife Georgie Hyde Lees, did automatic writing, and through their explorations, a message came through that made Yeats believe that the diamond doesn't just come to the person and choose that person in this one life, but is bound to that person through all the cycles of incarnation. And I'll mention Yeats again later. But before we talk more about Plato's ideas and the Renaissance, I'd love to begin by sharing a story with you that I came across recently. And it fits in with this question of the diamond's influence over successive lifetimes. This is a man named Lama Govinda who lived from 1898 to 1985. Some of you may have heard of him. His name originally was Ernst Lothar Hoffmann. He was born in Germany, and here he is in his later years. During the 1930s and the 1940s, he explored Tibetan regions, and he became a strong proponent of Buddhism and wrote several books, the most famous being The Way of the White Clouds. But years before he went to Tibet, he was living on the island of Capri in Italy, and someone invited him to a seance. Now, he didn't really go in for that sort of thing, but he decided, okay, I'll go to the seance. So they all sat around a table and put their hands on the table, and the person who was leading the seance decided to ask about the past lives of the participants. And there was some kind of way they interpreted the movements or the tapping of the table, I guess, spelling out letters or something like that. So when the leader asked about Lama Govinda, or Hoffman's, refer to him as Hoffman's past life, the table spelled out the word Novalis, and maybe some of you have heard of the poet Novalis. Novalis was the pen name of a German poet named Friedrich von Hardenberg, a philosopher of early German Romanticism who lived from 1772 to 1801. He died very young at the age of 28. Novalis is known as the originator of the central symbol of German Romanticism, the blue flower. And like other romantics, he believed in the deification of nature, and he spoke about the absolute and spiritual rebirth. He wrote poetry and novel fragments, and he wrote a draft of a philosophical system based on idealism, which he never was able to complete. He said, "Nothing is more indispensable to true religiosity than a mediator that links us with divinity." So this is exactly what the idea of the diamond is, which I think is interesting. So back to Hoffmann. Soon after this seance, Hoffmann was reading a story he had written as a child to a friend. And this story was intended to be part of a mystic novel in which Hoffmann wanted to explore his religious convictions and experiences. And so after the friend had listened for a while, he said, "Where did you get that?" And Hoffmann said, "I wrote that." And he said, "That sounds just like something Novalis wrote." And he encouraged Hoffmann to order some books by Novalis, which Hoffmann did. The other thing that was interesting was that the friend also told him that Novalis had died at an early age from tuberculosis in a particular sanatorium. And it turned out that Hoffmann had also been in that sanatorium for tuberculosis, but been cured. So then soon after that, Hoffmann went to a party, and at the party was a famous German scholar who kept staring at him. And Hoffmann didn't understand this. So then later he asked the hostess, "Why was this man staring at me?" And she said, "He was staring, do you know?" And he said, "She was staring at you because he said that you look just like this only portrait of Novalis." And he's writing about Novalis.
That's a coincidence, huh?
So this is actually, so that's the portrait of Novalis. This is a picture of Hoffmann later. So he was younger at the time when all of this was happening, and he resembled Novalis even more because they were basically the same age. He was the same age as Novalis in this picture, but you do see the resemblance, I think. I do. Anyway, so then the books Hoffmann ordered by Novalis arrived, and as he read, he found substantial parts of his own childhood work expressed in the same words and images he had used and often used. And it was the same thoughts, the same ideas. But Hoffman had decided to abandon that work because it was the scope was too broad, and he knew he would never be able to complete that in his lifetime. But he also realized that what was to be accomplished would continue in another life, and he went on to say, no work of importance that one's heart is bent upon with a single-minded devotion will remain unfinished. So that's certainly a strong case for the daimon in successive lifetimes. And of course there are many other examples, certainly in the Tibetan tradition, where they find the child who was a reincarnation of a former person, and that person then continues the work. So that was that story, which I loved that story. So moving on to Plato's myth of Earth from his work, The Republic, the idea is that each person enters into the world called by something. So how does this happen in the myth? Plato writes of souls who are in the afterlife, having arrived there from previous lives, and each has something called a lot to fulfill. So this lot is also called a portion of fate, and this portion of fate represents the individual's character. And so while lot means a way of life or worldly fate, in the dictionary, lot also means, obviously, a piece of ground. And I find that interesting also in the way James Hillman talks about the acorn theory, that we come in with this acorn full of potential, and we need to grow down as well as grow up as a person. So, so in the afterlife, they're choosing lots, and for example, the soul of the warrior Ajax chose the life of a lion, and Atalanta, the woman runner, chose the lot of an athlete. But Ulysses, remembering the trials and tribulations of his life, looked around and decided to find the lot of a businessman that had really no particular importance. And it had been neglected by everyone else, but he took that one. So when all the souls had chosen their lives, they go before Lachesis, one of the goddesses of destiny. And she sent with each, as the guardian of his life and the fulfiller of his choice, the genius or the daimon that had been chosen. Then Lachesis leads the soul to Clotho. Clotho means to twist by spinning. So under her hand and the turning of her spindle, she ratifies or she confirms that particular lot. And so in a way it could be as if she's putting that particular twist on the fate, which gives us our quirks and our particular little things that are unique to each of us. And then the genius, or the daimon, is again leads the soul to the spinning of atropos, which means not to be turned, inflexible, so you're stuck with it, that's it. And then the soul passes under the throne of necessity, so this is something you need to do. You need to fulfill this thing in your life. And Hillman says these lots in the myth are like images. It's like a whole style of fate in one shot, sort of in one pattern. And it's as if the soul says, this is the one I want, and this is my rightful inheritance. So we descend into this life from a higher plane or place, and then we have to fulfill our destiny. But there's one more place that the soul has to go, and that's through the plane of lethe, or forgetfulness. So we come and we don't remember what we're doing here, but our daimon does, and then our daimon throughout life is always trying to nudge us or remind us what to do. In the Jewish tradition, there's a legend that the evidence that we've forgotten our soul's destiny is pressed into our upper lip. So when we're trying to remember something, we often do this. Oh. So philosopher Plotinus said, being born, coming into this particular body, these particular parents, and in such a place, and what we call external circumstances form a unity and are, as it were, spun together. Now, there's a connection between our particular daimon and other daimons. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the daimons of different planets and stars. There's a connection between Eros, who's also considered a daimon as well as a god sometimes, and your personal daimon. In Plato's Symposium, the priestess Diotima says that Socrates taught that love is not a god, but rather a great diamond. Everything daimonic is between divine and mortal. In ancient philosophy, the soul was thought to be placed in the heart area. So it's your heart that holds the image of your destiny and calls you to it. So it's what you love is calling you. So Eros is connected with your own particular fate. And it may be something that you love, but that could also be something that's extremely difficult and challenging. It's your ultimate fulfillment, your ultimate challenge, and also your contribution to the world. So each of us has a task to fulfill for the good of all, and it's a divine imperative. Sorry, I thought there was okay, I didn't put this quote. So Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, said, "It is a man's duty to follow his diamond, which reflects the cosmic will. This requires us to love humanity in general and to act altruistically." So it's not for only our good, it's for the good of all, right? Plato goes on to describe diamonds as interpreting and transporting human things to the gods and divine things to men, just as Gary was talking about this reaching out to the different levels, between the two levels, from below to above and from above to below. So the diamond's an intermediary reminding us of our connection to the higher planes or deeper levels of consciousness. So how does the diamond manifest? Socrates claimed to have a daimonian or a divine something, that a voice that told him what not to do but didn't tell him what to do. And he said it was in something like a sign. And also a special being that watches over each individual. So, and the idea of the diamond as being part of us as a higher self would mean that there's a part of us that's here, but simultaneously there's another part that's in a higher dimension. And when we descended into this reality, this other part of us reaches down from time to time and gives us a hand or an indication at crucial moments. So moving on to the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, there was a great influx of ideas from ancient Greece, and they also returned to the writings of Roman times. And philosophers and artists incorporated these ideas in their own worldview. So Renaissance philosophy is a combination of humanism, writing from the times of the Roman civilization, and Neoplatonic philosophy, which was brought in by Greek scholars at the fall of Constantinople during the 15th century. And Platonism, as it was called, we call it Neoplatonism, they called it Platonism, was well preserved in Constantinople, where it was not in Europe during the Middle Ages. And Neoplatonism, or Platonism from Constantinople, had different elements, Arabic elements, elements from Jewish mystical philosophy. And at the same time, there were people coming in to Italy from Spain and Portugal who were being expelled, Arabs and Jews, bringing their philosophy. So it was a time when, similar to our time, when people are looking at all different cultures and philosophies, and we're taking them, we're studying them. It was something like that in Renaissance Italy. And so during the Renaissance, the idea of diamonds was part of a bigger system that dealt with astrology, medicine, and magic. And there was this idea that there are powers beyond the material plane that influence us and that we can influence. And that we can approach these powers through invocation, calling on them, calling on the gods and diamonds, and divination, seeing what our next step should be. Using all the elements of the natural world, including the stars and the planets, to attract the presence of the gods. So here we have kind of an overlap between the idea of diamonds and gods. It's not really clear, and there is confusion, and it's not a clear-cut idea. So we'll see that as we go along. This is Marsilio Ficino, who is probably the most important Renaissance philosopher. He translated all of Plato and Plotinus and other philosophers into Latin from Greek for the first time during the Renaissance. And he also wrote his own books, one of them being a book called 3 Books on Life, which had to do with medicine and astrology, and this idea he had called natural magic, which was using all the natural elements to connect us, to have a greater connection with all parts of the universe. So we wanted to integrate all the ideas he was studying, including the Hermetica, Egyptian Greek wisdom texts written in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, which are supposedly written by a man named Hermes Trismegistus, as Gary was talking about, also known as Thoth. And these writings talk about similar things to Neoplatonic writings: the divine, cosmos, mind, nature, and also alchemy and astrology. And here's a beautiful quote by Ficino that illustrates the connection between all things. There's a Platonic saying that the machine of this world is so connected that heavenly things are on earth in an earthly condition, and earthly things are in heaven in a heavenly dignity, and heavenly things are present in the hidden life of the world. So, back to the diamond. During the Middle Ages, a diamond is always a demon, but moving into the Renaissance, it takes on a more positive quality, and Ficino drew on medieval sources but developed his own practical astrology and astrological medicine. And in that longer quote that you have by him, the last few lines are, "At every person's birth, he or she is assigned a certain diamond by his own star, a guardian of life to help with his destined task." So there's this living nature to the cosmos, and the idea of his system is that the anima mundi, or the world soul, gave rise to the heavens, which then became astrological divisions, or celestial figures and images and constellations. And there are links not only between heaven and earth, but between different heavens, apparently. And individual souls are fragments of the world soul, or the cosmic self. And the planets and stars also have diamonds. They're also ensouled. But souls are more like patterned forces or vibrations rather than physical entities. So his work had to do with being a physician and finding ways to heal or strengthen the patient by strengthening the links between the person and planetary forces, basically. And he used stones and minerals, herbs, or animals associated with a particular heavenly object that needed to be influenced. For example, and I'm just imagining this myself, if someone had, for example, a heart condition, perhaps they would need to connect more with Venus or with Venusian things. If they perhaps were timid or shy or needed more aggressive energy, maybe they would need to connect more with Martian energy. He also used talismans, so stones or metals carved with images that represented different planetary forces, and they were also created at special times, at astrologically beneficial times for that particular person. So, let's see what we have here. So Joseph Campbell said, "The gods represent the patron powers that support you in your field of actions, and by contemplating the deities, you're given a kind of steadying force that puts you in the role, as it were, that is represented by that particular deity." So we can all do that now. We don't need to know about these talismans, although that might be great, but we can do that ourselves. We can study the different qualities of gods and goddesses and the different elements and plants and animals and use them to strengthen certain things. So Ficino included diamonds in this system of his, and he thought of them as intermediaries between planets and humans. And as I said, the idea behind the talismanic magic was that a person could attract powers, celestial powers, from the soul of the world, the anima mundi from the planets and the stars, if the object was made of a similar material and formed in a way so it had a similar vibration. And this greatly influenced, a lot of people don't know this, but it greatly influenced the art of the Renaissance, because many Renaissance paintings are actually talismans. So the idea of art in the Renaissance was to give a concrete visual or musical form to a divine essence. And probably the most famous example of this is the painting The Primavera by Botticelli, who was very close to Ficino and in this Platonic academy of Ficino's. So this is a complex talisman, and we're not going to go into all the symbolism, but it does have beneficial forces because there's Venus, who is a beneficial goddess. There's Mercury on the left, who is also beneficial. It's springtime. There's love, Cupid above. And it also is showing, it's sort of a circular motion of this Zephyr, god of the winds, coming into the world sort of in a lustful way. But the energy, the lustful energy, is being transformed here through the three graces towards Mercury, who's pointing to the heavens. So it's sort of a circular motion of God coming into the world and going back and coming back in. Okay. So, moving on. Another Renaissance philosopher, a Christian Kabbalist and Platonist, was a man named Francesco Giorgi, who lived from 1466 to 1540, and he wrote a book called De Harmonia Mundi. And he felt that stars are the medium, the governors through which God rules the world. And he also was explaining how we can attract favorable influences from the heavens. He said stars are connected with angels, and angels are the intelligences that move the celestial spheres. He also emphasized the importance of discovering which planets dominate your life. But he said instead of using a horoscope, which can be complicated, you can just observe your own innate tendencies. Because tendencies that are caused by your guardian angel are going to be the same as your dominant planet. They're going to be going in the same direction. So he said, we must, having removed all hindrances, submit ourselves to our guiding spirit, which, if we do not resist, will show us the way to which the heavens, our genius, and the supreme ruler lead us. So, and this idea is going to come back later with Yeats, that we really have to open ourselves up and submit to this force. Ficino wrote about diamonds, but he didn't talk a lot about his experiences, but another Renaissance philosopher did, named Girolamo Cardano. He was a physician, a mathematician, and an astrologer, and he formed an elaborate theory of the immortality of the soul, and he analyzed the role of practical wisdom in such diverse human activities as medicine and political action. He felt that real lasting happiness can be possible only if we demonstrate that the human soul is immortal and that God intervenes actively in the human world. He thought that there was a universal order that was a direct emanation of this thing called the One, the highest power, that governs all aspects of reality, and that everything that happens has been planned by God, and all that God has established can only be good. And he said this, although he himself had a particularly tortured life. He was illegitimate. He claimed his mother tried to abort him. He couldn't get into college for a long time. His son wound up murdering his son's wife and, was executed and all this kind of stuff. But still he felt, that life was good and that God, everything God planned was good. And he said that the diamond is an attendant or guardian spirit. The Greeks used to call them angels, while it is called spiritus in Latin. They are recorded as having favored certain people constantly. They were truly diamonds. I believe mine to be a good and merciful spirit. He also said that spirit is a material derived from God, a godsend. It manifests according to God's will what is to be, and it never errs. He said it was hard to prove rationally, but only by experience. That's why all of these words that we're using are only hints, really. Any discussion, it has to be experienced. He said once when he was upset and he was very ill, his father came to him in the form of a diamond and comforted him and gave him advice. So this, again, is that idea that a person who has passed away can then become a diamond and reach back and help the ones who are left behind. And so the idea of the diamond carries with it therapeutic possibilities. When we contact the diamond, something in us is healed, basically. So here, diamonds are seen as personal guardians and paternal spirits. And so with the diamond, we can make connections, we can have moments of inspiration, and they also connect us to this whole ensouled universe and body of knowledge. So we're connected to all the knowledge that is, and when our diamond contacts us, we can get guidance from a larger source. Another Renaissance philosopher was named Leone Abreu. His real name was Judah Leon Abravanel, and he emigrated into Italy from Lisbon. He wrote a book called Dialogues on Love. He used Platonic ideals in his work, but they were filtered through his heritage, which was Hispanic Jewish community. And so Kabbalah teaches that nothing is inconsequential and every piece is integral in the unfolding of creation, including us and what we do. And he said, the whole universe is like an individual, like a person. And though all of its parts were created by God with a common purpose, each part has its own particular purpose. In the same way, each person in the world can be happy when they accomplish the task they were designed for by the supreme craftsman. So we're just seeing how different people talked about the diamond, and it's similar, but there are differences. There are different shades of meaning. So, again, creation didn't happen just once, but it's continually unfolding. And in Kabbalah, they say it's like an infinite flower opening its petals. And human consciousness is informed by a soul force that gives us the power to emulate what they call the divine bestower or God. So we have an extraordinary capacity to influence the direction of creation. So we can see that different mystics discuss these ideas in different ways without regard for logic or consistency. But there is the same idea that this material world, some aspect of it mediates between different levels of reality. So in modern times, James Hillman, the founder of archetypal psychology, took up this idea of the diamond, especially in his book, The Soul's Code, In Search of Character and Calling. And he said each life is formed by a unique image, an image that is the essence of that life and calls it to a destiny. As the force of fate, this image acts as a personal diamond, an accompanying guide who remembers your calling. And like Heraclitus, Hillman felt that a person's diamond is their character, the mental or moral qualities of a person, which Hillman says are deep structures of personalities that are particularly resistant to change. And I've certainly experienced that, I'm sure you all have too. We change, we try to change ourselves and grow and do different things, but still, there's a similarity to what we were when we were small, and we're still carrying that same thing now. But Hillman wants to give us a fresh way of looking at our lives, at the importance of our lives. So he's saying instead of, looking back at our childhood and seeing what went wrong and what our parents did to us and all of that stuff, try to find the particular calling that was yours as a child and what that acorn wanted from you. And he says that the reminders of the diamond can work in many ways. It can motivate and protect us and can offer comfort, but it can also make the body ill because it is a myth. It's a mythic pattern, and it may pull us in different ways. And I don't know where the illness comes in, if that's when we resist it, or it could also be when we give into it too much because it's very demanding. It might want you to work and work and work on something. and you're tired and you have to say no at a certain point. And it's immortal, it doesn't go away. So this acorn theory is an individual energy that's in each person, and it comes up throughout our lifetime. And it's shown in your calling and in your life's work when it's fulfilled to its full potential. There may be things that you didn't do, and then maybe you don't see the full effect of the acorn. And Hillman also mentions Galen, the Greek physician and philosopher, who said that there was an ancient belief that says that acorns are primordial food, meaning that you feed off of your inner acorn, that your calling is your psyche's nourishment. And as I said before, he talks about growing up, but at the same time we need to grow down into the earth, into that lot that we were given to cultivate. And then he talks about a lot of, in his book, a lot of great artists and their childhoods and different events that happened. And one he mentions is the violinist Yehudi Menuhin, who when he was very, very small, before the age of 4, was taken to concerts by his parents. And in one case, they went to see a famous concertmaster named Louis Persinger play. And during one performance, Yehudi Menuhin asked his parents to buy him a violin for his next birthday. So his next birthday came around and he got his violin, but when he saw it, he threw it to the ground and started crying because it was a toy violin and it was made of metal and it had metal strings. So Hillman says that even as a child, the diamond stands in dignity and doesn't want to be messed with. And Hillman emphasizes, for Hillman, the diamond is not the person. It's something that accompanies the person, a non-human escort. So our task, as I said, is to fulfill the potential of our diamond, or bring our life as much as we can in line with the intentions of the diamond. It blesses us with its calling, and we bless it with the way we follow it. However, as I said, also the diamond can be very demanding, and many great artists, as we know, are very obsessive about their work. Thomas More, author of Care of the Soul, and now I'll plug my book, forward writer of my book, Outer Beauty, Inner Joy, Contemplating the Soul of the Renaissance. Thomas More wrote his most famous book, his first famous book was Care of the Soul, but he's written many wonderful books on the soul, creativity, and religion. He said it can be experienced as a counter voice, that the daimonic point of view is often contrary to our point of view, and that creative promptings are primarily daimonic, that its creative process is a conversation between one's mind and these deeper daimonic forces. And it's so profound that it's experienced. He says it's experienced as the other. He doesn't say it is the other, but he says it's experienced as the other. But remaining faithful to our art is honoring our diamond. He says it's not the same as a muse, which is inspiring, but the diamond is challenging. So something in the creative life, in its daimonic aspect, is erotic. Again, as I said before, it's what we love. It's eros pulling us. But eros is never fully satisfied. That's the nature of eros, to always make us want more. So moving on, Michelangelo was an eccentric artist who neglected his appearance, apparently was overly sensitive, he lived a squalid lifestyle, and he wrote of his emotional sufferings. He was a perfectionist, and he left a lot of his work unfinished. We can see his diamond at work in his childhood, because although he was born into a family of bankers, his mother died when he was 6, and so his father sent him to live with a stonecutter and his wife in a town where his father owned a marble quarry. So Michelangelo said, along with the milk of my nurse, I received the knack of handling chisel and hammer with which I make my figures. And Michelangelo was adopted by Lorenzo de' Medici when he was a boy, and so he grew up in the Neoplatonic atmosphere and is known as the sort of the ultimate, the quintessential Neoplatonic artist of the Renaissance. He said that art is a calling from God, that artists are like God, and that just as God created beauty in the physical world, it was the artist's function to also create beauty. So this idea of continuing God's work, completing the creation of the world, which is also in Kabbalah and Neoplatonism. And he said, "My eyes, desirous of beautiful things, and my soul likewise of its salvation, have no other means to rise to heaven but to gaze at all such things. For from the highest stars descends a brilliant light that pulls desire toward them, and down here is called love." That's the same idea, the connection of the different realms. Eros allows these different dimensions to come into a state of unity, or calls for these different dimensions to come into a state of unity, but we have to be the ones that take the action. Ficino said love is a magician, and that the whole power of love is the attraction of one thing for another. And Ficino said, whatever we love to do or want to do, what you dream of doing or talk a lot about doing, has been given to you by the heavens or the stars, by everything that came together to make you who you are. And that you have been given a certain diamond, a guardian of life, to help you in this task. And Kabbalah also talks about the importance of opening ourselves up to this divine influence through love. The Song of Songs says, "I am my beloved's, and his desire is towards me." And then the Zohar says the inner meaning of this verse is that the stirring below is accompanied by a stirring above. For there is no stirring above until there is a stirring below. So there's a source of life that is eternally manifesting the energy that's required for existence. And so there's this idea that all of creation is being sustained every moment by this energy. And if it stopped for 1 second, then we wouldn't be here, apparently. But this theory of continuous creation means that there's only now, it's all happening now. And the relationship between the upper levels and the lower levels is necessary for both sides, that the creator and the creation are creating each other simultaneously somehow. And from what I've read about, I'm not a physicist, but I've read a little bit about quantum physics, and from what I've read about quantum physics, it says that we create the world by our observations. So the universe continues to be created one observation at a time. So what our take is on things is creating something. So by our individual creativity, we're participating in divinity. And here's the famous Vitruvian Man by Leonardo, which shows the interpenetration of the spiritual world and the material world. And Leonardo was another eccentric artist who had a wide range of interests and didn't finish a lot of what he started. But Joseph Campbell, in looking at this, I think of what Joseph Campbell said, is that we have to be transparent to the transcendent. So letting that influence come into our lives. So the square is the material world and the circle is the spiritual world, and then there's the number 5, many times repeated. 5, there are 5, well, there are many examples of 5. Some of them there are 5 elements, 5 senses of physical perception, 5 geometrical regular solids, and here the human being forms a 5-pointed star. And another quote by Novalis. Novalis said, "There is but one temple in the universe, and that is the body of man. Man is a sun. His senses are the planets." So I think it's interesting, these different people from different times, different countries, saying things that resonate with each other. So how do we follow our diamonds? We have to be courageous. We have to step out and make a stand. We have to take risks, and we have to follow our own inspiration and risk being criticized by others. And as human beings, we can use our creativity for good or for evil. And we might not even know that much about our calling until we start looking back, and then it's like, oh yeah, that fits, and oh yes, that happened, and that led me here. And sometimes, you know, when it's happening, it might seem tragic or less than tragic. It just might seem like an awful experience, but there may be accidents or heartaches that do somehow have their place. You know, as Cardano said, it's all God. It's all the way it's meant to be somehow, even though we don't understand it. And the call comes in different ways for different people in different times of life. It can come as an urge or a deep longing, a persistent fear, or a recurring theme or image. There may be a certain place that attracts you, that you want to go there, or you want to return there, a certain activity that you're called to do. As I've gotten older, I'm just trying to not think about it so much, and you know, not judge it and say, oh, that's ridiculous, why should I do that? I'm doing it, but why? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, I'll just do it. If I have time, let me fit it into my schedule and do it, because it's on my mind for some reason. It's there for a purpose. So, Joseph Campbell says, it's about individuality and what gives you a sense of importance and makes you come alive. Thomas More says, to find your diamond is also to find your weakness or your vulnerable spot that wants you to sacrifice everything for that one desire or calling. I have done that. And are there others here who have done that same thing? So later I'm just going to talk about, you know, at the end I'll talk about how to, you know, try to find a balance with all of that. Yeats, who lived from 1865 to 1939 and won the Nobel Prize in Literature, as I said, was married to a woman named Georgie Hyde Lees, and they experimented with automatic writing quite a bit. And in an essay he wrote in 1996 to use the term diamond, seeing it as a controlling power and great men as his servant. Now these two quotes are very similar. And they're interesting and kind of peculiar. I was thinking about what they mean. Heraclitus said, mortals are immortals, and immortals are mortals, the one living the other's death and dying the other's life. And Yeats said, to me, all things are made of the conflict of two states of consciousness, beings or persons which die each other's life, live each other's death. So you may have thoughts about what that means. I haven't studied Yeats in detail, and I don't know exactly what he meant. But for me, I feel that it means, you know, Ficino and others, I think Plato also talked about divine frenzy. When you're in the act of creation, you kind of have to, it's like that a little bit, now they call it a state of flow. It's that idea that you're surrendering to this power. You're not totally abdicating yourself, although this sounds like you're supposed to just totally abdicate yourself and let this other thing flow through you. And maybe that is, in a way, what we have to do some of the time. So there are these two forces, as you know, there's us, maybe it's the ego, I don't know, and then there's the other thing, the inspired part, the part that comes from another dimension. So it's trying to find a state of balance with that. So, unfortunately, I put the name there in the picture. Here's one of Blake's paintings. Blake, we all know, was an English poet, painter, and printmaker, largely unrecognized during his time, who devised an entire mythology of his own, and he was considered crazy by his contemporaries and wasn't very successful, didn't make money. But he had visions throughout his life, and they were often beautiful religious themes and inspired him with his spiritual work and his pursuits. And religious concepts are a major theme with Blake. He believed that he was personally instructed and encouraged by archangels to create his artistic work. And he also claimed that his works were actively read and enjoyed by them. And in a letter of condolence to a friend of his whose son passed away, Blake said, "I know that our deceased friends are more really with us than they were when they were apparent to our mortal part. 13 years ago, I lost a brother, and with his spirit I converse daily and hourly in the spirit, and see him in my remembrance in the region of my imagination. I hear his advice, and even now write from his dictate." He felt that imagination should supersede reason, and that ideal forms should be constructed not from observations of nature, but from inner visions. And he said, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's." So he embraced imagination as the body of God or human existence itself. He speaking about being driven by your diamond, he worked up until the day of his death, working on a series inspired by Dante's comedy, and was said to have spent his last money on a pencil. And then the final person I'm going to mention is William Stafford, who was a modern poet. He was born in 1914. I'm not sure when he died. He had a daily ritual of writing, and his writing focuses on the ordinary things of life. Kept a journal for 50 years and composed nearly 22,000 poems, and 3,000 were published. The day he died, he had written a poem. "You don't have to prove anything," my mother said. "Just be ready for what God sends." But this quote is one of my very favorite quotes, and it really speaks to me of the idea of the diamond, of hanging on, of following your inner vision. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So, finally, whenever we follow a calling, we're deepening our connection with the source of the calling. And by listening and taking some action, we also get clearer about the unique way that the source wants to express through us. Joseph Campbell said, "You have to let the energy come through you, but you have to go through the personal, your own unique expression." So as I said, the diamond can be difficult and challenging. It can drive you. It can move you where you don't really want to go. It may call you to do more than you feel capable of doing. But as Thomas More says, while Eros moves us towards what we love to do, we also need the rationality of Logos. So Eros calls us with love and longing and attraction and desire, but Logos, which is the word and means logic, brings understanding, wisdom, and intellectual insight. And so Logos, as symbolized by the Greek god Apollo, stands back and shoots from afar, helps us reflect back from a distance. So, but however, even though we need Logos to help us step back and be rational, Logos can also still at the same time bring us closer to what we love by exposing us to more of a body of knowledge. We might need to do certain research, rational research. We can't just always be carried away in a frenzy of creativity. So we need those two to find a balance with our passions. So that's it for this talk, but I would love to hear your thoughts, if you have any, about situations in your life when you have felt any of these urges, or any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Julianne. I'm not sure that everyone got one of the handouts, the stapled ones, but.
Yeah, I mean, I can read that out, you know, I have one here. And I could, I'd be happy to share, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's a good exercise for
Do we have time to just ask this? Yeah, I mean, does anybody have, what are some of the symbols or images you remember from childhood, or images that felt meaningful to you, or something urging you to do something? Yeah.
So I grew up in a farming family in California, and although we lived in the city, we spent tons of time out in the country. And one of my most prevailing images is running into a field of corn. One of my siblings, but it was so tall, it was much taller than we were. And we all went different directions, and we'd get lost and call out to our father and, I don't know, look for the sunlight. And somehow we always ended up finding the end of the row again, but it was something about only the connection with the earth and the beauty of that green color and the feeling of just being completely surrounded and immersed.
Beautiful. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, songwriting. It's really interesting. When I was about 18, I took piano lessons when I was young, and I didn't like it after a while. I got pretty good, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the discipline. And one day, I had this urge to write a song. And I sat down and I wrote like 6 verses with internal and external rhymes in perfect iambic pentameter, I believe, that told a very complex story. I did it in about 2 minutes. I just like upchucked it. And then I went to the piano and wrote all the music in about, 10 minutes. Just came right out of me. And so, you know what that is. And the challenge in my life has always just been getting out of its way, because I had other plans for my life. And, this finding the balance between allowing that, whatever that is, because the one thing I don't like to even say, well, I'm a songwriter, because it ain't me doing the work. It's just, I just get out of the way and it happens. And it's an odd thing, and what's been so interesting for me is how my ego plays into it. I tend to be kind of quiet, but my ego can get very gloaty, and I'm constantly working with Buddhists and Chinese meditations to kind of try to diminish it or figure out what to do with the gloaty ego, because it's like hovering over here, and I find that it most definitely gets in the way of my creativity. So I think there's really interesting, interactions going on. I don't know whether other people have experiences like that.
Thomas More said it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue between two parts of you, that's right?
No, well, there's 3.
Or 3 parts of you.
Well, whatever it's got. There's as many as you want, or as few as you want. It's up to you.
Why do you feel you have a bloated ego if at the same time you're saying it's just coming through you, you're just the vessel?
Yeah, because I let it come through me, and then my bloated ego goes, wow, look what I just did. You want to see what I just did? And that's my bloated ego.
Yeah, that's
And
opposite
then
what
I
you just
judge
said.
it. Is this good? Is it bad? How good is it? Is it 80? Is it 90? Is it 52? Everyone's got that same.
You just said you didn't. Now you're saying you do. You're saying
No, I'm
you're
not.
feeling 2
I'm
things
totally-
simultaneously that are
That is
opposites.
correct. That's
okay.
No, you're not getting it.
You're right.
Time is linear. The diamond is not linear. It does not work in a linear fashion. When you are the creator, there's no linearity, there's no time, and there's very little ego. You just do it. It's
That's
pure
gibberish.
experience.
That's just too much gibberish for me to even stimulate.
Well, that's unfortunate. That
I know it is. I want to talk.
Well, maybe you can talk about it.
Jeez.
Does this connect with the phenomenon of synchronicity, though, in some
Yeah.
way?
Yeah, it does.
Where there's a lot of detail in the microcosmic things in the microcosm, I should say, that take place. that are really connected with our day-to-day activities.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where these sort of fateful meetings go. You met that person at that time. Or I was telling a story to Magda about one time I was looking for a job and I had a choice between doing some work in an office or teaching, and I had 2 different resumes. And I ran out of my apartment intending to go to the office place. And so I had that resume, but when I got to the place, I realized I was at the school. And so I didn't have the right resume, but I went upstairs anyway and talked to the people. And as I was leaving, and this has never happened before or since, okay, but I looked outside and there was a billboard with angels' wings, and it said peace on earth. And in fact, teaching is what I had done before, and it's what I did after, and it's basically what I should be doing, so.
I just must say you really spoke from my soul. You know, I had small talent as a painter when I was little, but I also always wanted to connect it to spirituality, and so I wasn't sure. So I thought perhaps I'm going to solve the situation by marrying another artist.
That happens.
And when that didn't work out, I finally, was forced to follow my own diamond and connected to my own spirituality. But I just wanted to ask, there is a movie based on the book of David Mitchell, I believe, Atlas, what is it? Cloud Atlas, which very well connects similar ideas of, souls following in the calling of a certain kind and making sort of the research for Godhead in this way. Kind of a group reincarnations.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm inattentive. That could be. But could you just briefly recapitulate? You said you would end with talking about achieving a balance.
Well, okay, yes.
That elusive, very elusive balance.
Yeah. Well, the Thomas More about the Eros and Logos is one thing, but I think, and that's an important thing, I have a tendency to want to do a lot of research and write big things, and, for this one book, I must have spent, thousands of dollars on books, and I'm still doing it for another book I'm doing, and it makes no sense. I can't afford it. So at a certain point, I have to use my rational mind.
Right.
But another way of creating balance is, I think, the way, Ficino talked about the natural magic. So
Right.
if I'm also pulled all the time into exploring death and the afterlife. And, if I go into a bookstore, I have to pull myself away from the death and dying section, So that's because, there's this idea of Saturn. And there's a book by Walt Whitcover called Born Under Saturn. I have a strong Saturn influence, so I'm pulled into these deep. Okay, so then that's in my astrology, so then I have to counteract that with Venusian forces, Venus, lightness, go outside, be in nature, wear white clothing. For example, I stopped wearing black. I used to wear black because it was easy. Okay, this is navy, but I wear white a lot now. Getting sunlight. Listening to uplifting music, and so we balance ourselves. We can balance ourselves through the different planetary forces. Does that help at all?
Yes, it helps. I was thinking of it more in a pragmatic way in terms of balancing the creative with the survival, but that's kind of that's more problem. Of kind of a what color is your parachute sort of thing,
Yeah. I have that. I struggle to support myself because I just want to do these big creative projects that, I don't know where they're leading. They're taking years and years. So.
And just apropos of her question and talking about songwriting, I've been listening and I read been focusing a little bit on Neil Young recently, and there was a quote from him saying that when the muse hits, everything stops. It doesn't matter where he is, who he's with. He said, people close to me have been hurt by this. I may have alienated people, but when the muse strikes, I give everything to the muse. I give all of my energy, everything stops, and I just follow the muse. And I think there's something pretty compelling about that.
I mean, there is, but, you know, yes, and as I said, like Michelangelo, you know, rejected people, was alone, and but they were supported by rich patrons, you know,
Right.
Leonardo. But I also heard Philip Glass speaking one time, and he said that for a long time, he, as a discipline, he only allowed himself to write music from a certain time. But then at a certain point, he said, "Oh, the hell with it," you know. And he. But another point about what you said about bringing the daimonic into the practical. I think you can find a way to do work that is meaningful and earns you money. You just have to try to get to the essence of what the diamond is. It's not necessarily just the painting, or there's a deeper essence to, or writing or whatever. There's a deeper essence to that that's hard to put into words. You have to kind of contemplate it. And then that can feed into a completely different, for example, when I teach or when I do my coaching, that's informed by all the other stuff I do. And I'm finding now that finally there's beginning to be a balance.
Clarissa Pinkola Estes is a Jungian analyst and an incredible storyteller, and she did a wonderful take on this very issue. So it's a great resource about finding balance.
Okay.
Then the other, I teach Death and Dying, and there's a book called Tuesdays with Maury, and he talks about this really fundamental thing that we all share as humans, which is the tension of the opposites. So this is just something that's so in our lives. We all struggle with it. And so that's another really good reference for just the bigger picture is it's just inherent in being human. And the real task is how do we engage with what we love, our creativity, and also sort of incorporate our human relationships, our practical responsibilities,
Balance.
and all of those.
Finding the balance, finding life
Yeah.
balance. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, I think on a planetary level, you were referring to planetary influences, and Saturn is certainly a very depicted by Kepler in his, especially when you find the tonalities of all the planets, the heaviest vibration, unnervingly heavy and kind of a pessimistic sensation that it gives, whereas Jupiter has a Jovian, forth-giving force, and the other planets which are aware.
Yeah, Jupiter with, well, Venus
Mercurial
also,
is
Jupiter,
much more
yeah, for
spinning
sure.
and delivering, all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But the Saturn is a very heavy and unhealthy force in a sense. There's been a lot written about that. Susan Sontag
Wrote about that also. I mean, Ficino, in Ficino's book, that's the main sort of thrust of it, is to offset the Saturnian influence, because it was written really for scholars and philosophers who are, when you study all the time, it brings you down, basically, so he was trying to figure out ways to, and he also suffered from that.
It's the force of toil,
Yeah.
especially also.
Yeah.
It's the force of toil and that being under the work that you're doing rather than creatively inspired through a flow, and that's Saturn.
Yeah.
But the interesting about the daemon on a physical level reminds me, and it has something to do with the mineral, it's not what you're talking about exactly, but the quartz crystal, which is really responsible for the radio that is, where the primitive radio was just a cat's whisker touched to receiver I'm talking about, to a quartz crystal, and that actually brought forth a signal that came through the crystal itself.
Oh, wow.
And so it's the same thing with transmission. It requires a quartz crystal to assign frequency. So that has to do, I think, with the inner diamond of the psyche, the third eye.
Yeah, it does sound like the word diamond.
But it's not. I know.
But I know what you're saying. Well, that's that idea of there's an intermediary, as Novalis says, and
Yeah.
And Ficino said, you know, certain, and now everybody does, you know, crystals, you know, is a kind of something that can connect us.
We are also supposed to choose our date of birth as well as parents in order to guide us, you know, in our chosen or predestined path.
Yeah, so we can't blame our parents.
Let's start karma.
Well, you wouldn't be there but for karma.
Huh?
You wouldn't be there but for karma.
I know.
Well, I mean, that's the Buddhist way, which I also, I'm 80% Buddhist, but, I like.
73 here.
I like Kabbalah because in that, they say that, you know, well, I mean, in Buddhism also the world is holy, but in Kabbalah it's more, you know, and again, I don't know that much about it, but it's just a sort of more positive slant about us being here. It's not just karma. We're meant to be here for a good reason also, and we're always in the process of perfecting ourselves. So we don't have to worry about not being good enough because it's like an eternal thing. Even in Buddhism, they say once you become a Buddha, there's eternal Buddha activity. So it's just,
Well, we still have a cosmic responsibility because at this point in history, as far as we know, we're the only people in the universe, which I'm sure is not the case, but, you know, we have to keep ourselves going in order to have that communicate that human consciousness with the consciousness of the universe.
yeah, I mean, we have to keep going anyway because there are 7 billion people and they're having children and they need to have a good life.
No,
so.
I know, but I mean as far as the political dimension, that's a part of our responsibility is to not
Yes.
exacerbate.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
That
Yeah.
happens a lot. The trend, the current of aggression
Oh, it's terrible.
it's rising right now badly. Not in macrocosmic and also microcosmic. Horrible things.
So we're fortunate to be here,
Yeah.
right, and not in some terrible place. Right? Okay, so.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.